Show your T-Ball team spirit and buy your hard-working Art Lab team a cup of coffee, which helps fuel purchases of high-octane equipment and T-Ball tech that get poured back into percolating, highly caffeinated content for you. Just go to buymeacoffee.com and search Therapy Bites.
On this episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Did you know a healthy self-concept can improve your relationships, your parenting effectiveness, and even your work performance? We're streaming our own guru of personal greatness, Jason Cercone, into the Art Lab on the TherapyBites podcast to share how he works behind the scenes, helping some big-time influencers recognize their own unique value. And these same strategies can give your own self-concept a much-needed boost. Rip the straps off your own self-concept straitjacket and join the T-Ball team for real-life personal branding hacks you can use to saw through self-sabotaging, self-defeating thoughts. It's all fresh from the therapy couch, courtesy of self-esteem super branding coach Jason Cercone on an episode we call Owning Your Value, the psychology of self-concept and building your brand in business, home, and life.
Beware, there be challenging thinking ahead, T-ballers.
But it just might change your life by enhancing how you think about you.
Stay tuned following the interview for On the Couch and Off the Rocker. Our special guest's psycho-silly analysis by Art Lab's own head cabbager, Dr. Ima Freudnot.
Welcome to Therapy Bites Art Lab, where Dr. Heath and his special guests share real-life stories of helping and healing, fresh from the actual therapy couch, while taking a bite out of common counseling missteps and misconceptions. And now, here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
But today we're going to be talking about owning your value, the psychology of self-concept and building your brand in business, home, and life. Jason is the Dr. Frankenstein of branding. What I mean by that? I mean he takes the best from all over and stitches it together to help develop top strengths and best practices. He helps value-driven coaches and consultants establish authority, become thought leaders in their own little niche, and take their brands from unknown to undeniable. And he works a lot with helping effective podcasting, guest strategies, and I suspect hosting strategies too. And we've asked Jason to put us at the Art Lab under the bright lights, his discerning bright lights of his expertise and his own magnifying glass aimed right at the T-Ball team, as we will be his voluntary on-air guinea pigs today, and he'll pick apart what we're doing right and what we're getting wrong. Bad, shame, Therapy Bites podcast, but we're getting better. Now, why would we do such a thing? Well, because only in self-evaluation is there self-improvement, and we hope that you'll use some of these strategies today to focus on your own self-evaluation and your self-improvement. This episode's about sculpting, honing, sharpening who you are, your brand in the various areas of your life, such as mom, dads, business owners, spouses, and revolutionary entrepreneurs. And Jason, thank you for being here. We're going to have a big, lively discussion, a no-holds-barred self-assessment, teaching people how to do that in their lives, careers, and businesses, discovering your own amazing, what you're best at, how to be a leader in your niche, business, home, and life, common hurdles that people need to overcome, and developing thought leadership. And this is what you excel at. I mean, this is your bread and butter, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I do most of that in the podcasting space, but ultimately the goal when I'm working with people, it's not just about developing a podcast or developing a podcast strategy or being a good podcast guest. That's a vehicle. For me, it's all about tapping into, as you had said to lead off the show, turning your brand into something that's unknown and making it undeniable. And in order to do that, you need a vehicle. You need to be able to tell your story. I gravitated to the podcast platform because for me, this is where I fell in love with audio in college. And then I had a little bit of a hiatus until I discovered podcasting in 2015. And I've been running with it ever since. So this is a phenomenal way to tell your story, to position yourself as a resource to others. And I take great pride in helping people understand how they can best leverage this medium, because I bring a podcaster's perspective to everything I do. Since I've been podcasting for so long, I know what podcasters are looking for, what they want to accomplish with their show. So I can instruct and inform and train a guest. Here's the best way to maximize your time. So you help them create valuable content. And in return, you're going to get positive response from that audience, and perhaps even some opportunities to grow your brand just from the new relationship that you built by being a powerful, value-driven guest. So there's a ton in this, but at the end of the day, it's all about building a solid brand and putting that brand on the map using your voice to do so.
And we're going to do a bit of a twist on that, audience members out there, listeners, T-ballers, in that it's my belief that you can steal some of these strategies of podcasters developing brands and business leaders developing brands and decide what your brand is as a parent, as a wife, as a husband, as a employee, as an expert in your own niche, in your own field, as an entrepreneur. And this is really, would you say, Jason, that it's really about, in particular the podcasters, deciding who you are, what your message is, and staying on message? You're really just hammering that message of who you are and being genuine to that message.
That's a big part of it. You have to know who you are. You have to know what you are looking to accomplish. And wrapped into all of that, you need to be someone that's there to serve. And in your messaging, it has to speak to your ideal customer, because at the end of the day, they're looking for someone that can bring the transformation that they seek. Perhaps that transformation is something just as small as an answer to a question. Maybe it's something as grand as, are you the person that can help me lose 100 pounds because you've got a proven system that other people are saying works? Okay. Tell me how to do that, because at the end of the day, I care about me in this situation, not so much about you. I just know you're my resource. So in that entire process of making that connection, there is a small element that's going to tell people who you are. But you have to tell them how you're the resource that's going to deliver the transformation they seek, or your message is going to get lost, because people aren't seeking out a bunch of accolades or just to learn about somebody. They're looking to solve a problem in their life. If you're the resource that can do that, your messaging will speak to that, and it's going to give them the reassurance that they're investing their time and money in the right person and the right brand that's going to help them get to where they want to be.
So, Jason, I'm just curious, what have been some of your challenges that you faced?
In growing my brand,
in growing your brand and just coming to the place where you are right now in your business?
For me, it was, probably the biggest challenge that I had to face was a pivot. And I'm not going to say I'm the only one that had to do this because of the pandemic, but I was doing podcasting. I was working with a couple people to help them develop their shows, but I had built a brand in the craft beer industry at that point in time. This was pre-pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I was helping some brewery partners that I had made with marketing and getting their products positioned and placed in bars and breweries bars and bottle shops, distributors, you name it. And business was good and things were great, but I turned 40 and realized that while this is going well, I don't know if this is something I'm as passionate about now as I was in my early 30s when I built this. At that point in my life, I'm thinking, I've been drinking beer since I was a teenager. This is going to be something I want to run with for life. But I got older, and that luster, that shine kind of wore off to some degree. So I had also come into the business or into the space, at least I felt like there was still a lot of work that needed to be done to build some awareness. I felt like there were a lot of breweries doing some great things out there, but there weren't enough voices to extol those great virtues. So I wanted to be one of those voices, and that morphed and evolved over time. But now, as we sit and record, it's almost 2023, the beginning of 2023, and people know about these breweries. People are drinking good beer. So the job is done, and I'm not saying that this was because of me. I'm just saying that it's caught on, and my work needed to pivot. So I was looking at what I could do long term, and podcasting was what I wanted to do full time. I was just looking at two things: how do I make that switch full time? And does it make sense to, because the business I was running was obviously working well. And then when the pandemic hit, everything went to hell because all the bars were closed, the restaurants were closed. We lost a lot of outlets. Even these breweries I was working with, they didn't have a tap room that they could open to the public. It was a crazy time. So I had to get incredibly creative just to stay afloat. But I also looked at the challenge in front of me was the universe is telling you something, dude. You've got to use this time to make this transition and go the way that you're feeling you need to go. So that's what I did. So that took some effort to get on the right path and to make sure that it was going to make sense to leave that world behind. And in July of 2021, I made that change. I made that leap. And I'm continuing to build on all of that today. But it was a big challenge because it's tough to take something that still has some value to it, it's still working, and to say, I'm going to go a different way completely. But I'm happy I did it. And I'm much more happy in what I do and working with the people I do. So that was the biggest challenge that I had to overcome for sure.
Now, I'm going to guess, Jason, that you had a lot of voices in your head trying to talk you out of this.
Yeah, there was always that guy on the left shoulder, guy on the right shoulder. One guy's saying, yeah, you really want to do this, so this is the time. And the other guy going, you've got something good, man. Why are you trying to rock the boat? I think we all have those types of internal conversations on a daily basis, and it just comes down to making the best decision for you in the long run. And when this whole thing started in my head, and again, this was my 40th birthday was on December 29th, 2019. And I always reflect back on the year that was, look at what went well, what didn't go well. And I remember that conversation that I was having with myself on my birthday, that this was a good year. Things are going in the right direction. It was everything you wanted. But now you're 40. Do you really want to be doing this work into your 40s, into your 50s, even maybe into your 60s? And the answer from the guy on the left shoulder was a resounding no, dude. No, this is probably not going to be what you want to be doing for the rest of your life. So, okay, thank you, little man. What do I want to do instead? And the other guy's going, podcasting is where you're at. That's where your heart's at. That's what you're doing. That's what you're helping others do at the moment. Like, what can we do to get there? So sometimes those conversations can be productive if you could learn to shut the person out that's trying to steer you towards the negative, because we are so prone as humans to put our emphasis on the negatives for whatever reason. And I had a corporate job that I lost back in 2015. And that was, ironically, 3 days before I recorded my first podcast. Wasn't by plan. We'd already had scheduled to do that podcast, just didn't know I was going to have job loss 3 days before it. But it was at that time that I knew that I had to accentuate the positives. I didn't want to get hung up on what had happened. I wanted to focus on what was coming. Got a new podcast. I've got a little business that now I'm going to dedicate my full effort to. Accentuating the positives can be huge, and it can block out some of those negative voices that try to steer you down the wrong path.
Well, I think that's great advice. And a little bit of neuroscience behind that for your listeners is Jason mentioned pivoting, and I love that term. That's going to be my new word for the day. Maybe that'll be my new word for the week. Pivoting is turning from what you know to something that you don't really know, something that is familiar to something that's not familiar. And the brain, as many of you have heard me say, loves patterns because we believe, our brains are structured to believe that in familiarity is safety. And that's okay because, often it may be right. It's good that your brake pedal and gas pedal don't spontaneously flip-flop when you're driving down the road. That pattern of predictability is kind of a safe thing driving a vehicle. However, we come to believe that the unfamiliar, therefore, is dangerous. And that's just not the case. Now, it's not a bad thing. Here's a unfamiliar thing for you. If you walk up to your front door after being gone to work all day and the door's cracked open, that's unfamiliar, unless you have kids that leave the door open, because what that could mean is that there's a robber waiting in your home. And that lack of familiarity sends off alarm bells. But often there is a false positive, and that is, the false positive is that there's a danger here, except there's not. just because it's unfamiliar doesn't mean it's dangerous. And at some point, Jason, as you mentioned earlier, you had podcast numero uno. Did you struggle right up to hitting the button, going live with that recording on podcast number one?
It was an experience, I will say that. And I will give you the full story to really give a backbone to this. I had worked in the beer industry, as I had said, and I had launched this app that was designed to help promote events and beer releases and all of these great things. That was the idea. And I had some partners from the bar scene, from the brewery scene. They really liked what I was doing, and they got on board with it. And then I did this little obnoxious launch leading up to when the app was going to be live for people to download. And the day it went live, this guy just started immediately trolling me on Twitter about how terrible it was and how much of a bad idea it was. And I responded back with, man, what's your problem? Like, what do you think needs improve with this? And he started saying, oh, you need to do this and you should be thinking this. And I responded with, man, I am thinking about those things. Like, I don't know what evidence I put out there to make you think I'm not, but it got me curious. What does this guy do? So I went to his account and he hosted a beer podcast. And my friend and I had been kicking around doing a podcast. We just hadn't landed on what we wanted to talk about. We're big sports fans. We like pro wrestling. Beer was, I don't even know if beer ever had come up, but I just remember when I saw that he had a beer podcast, I called my friend and said, I've got our idea. We're going to do a beer podcast and we're going to do it better than that guy. And his response was, great, let's do it. So that was the plan, if you will. Jumped on Amazon, grabbed a couple microphones, grabbed a cheap mixing board, decided that, well, we're beer podcast, but we'll mix some sports in as well. So now we're not targeted. We're not defining an audience. We're just going to turn on microphones and talk. Strike two. Hey, where do you want to do the first episode from? Let's find this noisy bar. And it was one of my partners that had come on board with me with the app, so I felt it just made sense to go there. So it was on trivia night. So it's packed. There's people everywhere. It's noisy as hell. And we record a podcast episode. Had no clue what we were doing. I don't know if we even had a format. We just sat down. My microphone didn't even have a mic stand. I had to shove it into the styrofoam that came in, like the box that protected the microphone when it came in the
That's
mail.
awesome. What a great, that's great.
So and we did no editing and put it out on the internet and said we had a podcast. So like, I think I was a little presumptuous saying that I was going to do much better than this guy who had been podcasting for a few years. So that was on me. That was my bad. But going into it, I never felt any fear. I felt excitement because I had radio experience. I had done radio in college in the past. Nothing major. It was a college radio station, but it got me excited. I had a little show where I would play music, or I'd have friends come in and I'd do interviews. A couple of my friends played on the baseball team, so we could do a little sports segment. It was fun. And when I got in front, or I guess as it is, behind the microphone again, I realized how much I loved it. And it rekindled this flame that told me, okay, this is something. Like, this could really be something that you do. And if you do it well, who knows where it can go. So we ran with that podcast as long as we could, scheduling and real life and jobs and you name it got in the way. So it wasn't necessarily the easiest to do every week like we had intended. But I started a second one. After that, we shut that show down. I started a second podcast. And in the midst of that, probably 20 some episodes in, I decided I really do want to do this. But it's time to take time away from the microphone and just study and get better at it. And by getting better, what that meant was watching others, listening to other podcasts, watching the news, listening to newscasters. How are these people communicating with their audiences? I want to bring an element of that to everything I do. And that was really how it all changed for me, and then ultimately led me to where I am today. But that first show, as much of a train wreck as it may have been, was incredibly important to this story. That first chapter, it's something that we all need to have in the evolution of our brands, to steal my own podcast's name. If we don't have that, it's very hard to have a foundation on which to build upon. That first chapter was incredibly important because it rekindled everything, and it got me going. And here we are today.
And look at the amazing story that you have to tell. I mean, if everything always goes right, I can't think of a more boring life than everything you touched going perfect.
Yeah.
You know, hey, Doc Heath, tell me about your life. Well, my life story is one of just perfection. Everything has always gone right for me. Well, how boring is that? Can you imagine watching a movie where for the main characters everything just goes right? I mean, it never make it to the movie theaters. It never even make it to the Netflix.
Exactly. And not only that, I get to, when I can tell this story to people that I'm working with and say, this is what you don't do. You can learn from my own experience. Here's where we missed. Here's how you do it better. And I'm bringing my own experience to the table to show you how to do it right.
Never waste a mistake. Never waste a hurt. Never waste a misadventure. Use it to lift up, push up, support the lives of others. And one more thing I want to mention about the troll, which are people, I guess, that just get their jollies out of putting other people down on the internet. I'd like to know where that term came from, troll. There's such a thing as a trolling motor, but I'm not sure the word troll came from. Is it the creature that lives under the bridge? These are the creatures that live in the internet. But I want to point out to the listeners that if you are doing the same thing that everyone else is doing simply because of someone's approval and not to differentiate yourself, if you're doing the same thing as even one other person, then one of you is unnecessary. That means that you're going to have to discover some opposition. And the second thing is, if you don't have opposition, I would challenge you that you're probably not going in the right direction. Those that head in a healthy direction will always encounter, at some point, opposition. It kind of lets you know what you're doing right because you're getting attention. One of the things that I confront as a dad is the whole helicopter parenting nonsense out there. And by the way, there is no diagnosis for that, but I take that head on because in my practice, a lot of the kids that I work with really could have used some more helicopter parenting. And the only ones that complain about helicopter parenting are those that it is an inconvenience for, such as teachers and coaches and college professors maybe, and neighbors and family members, maybe the kid, but it's only those that are inconvenienced by it, and that's something that I hit head on. I'm holding my fist to the camera there because I want to correct that. I want to differentiate myself by taking on some ridiculous Kool-Aid drinking, as we said, pseudo-psychological nonsense. And if you're going to be in any field and find value in it, and somebody find value in what the message you bring, you're going to have to embrace opposition and see it as a measure of success, not as a stumbling block. And I suspect that that's not your first time. I think that have you had more opposition in the meanwhile?
Oh, absolutely. I think whenever you're producing content, you have to make peace with it immediately that not everyone's going to like it and not everyone's going to agree with your frame of mind or your perspective. And if you get hung up on the people that don't, then you're really going to unravel. And looking back on that experience again, like you think of how things progressed, and it made me take action and say, okay, well, I'm going to do this better than him. And I honestly never met that guy, and I don't know what he's doing today. Maybe I did become a better podcaster, but I sure as hell wasn't the very first time that I went on. But that was my own arrogance to make me think that, oh yeah, I'm going to blow this guy out of the water. I didn't even come close. It took me years to get anywhere near that level. But you can't let those things hold you back, and you can't let what other people tell you dictate what your action's going to be. And if you get hung up on what the minority is saying, forget it. You're screwed. Like this is a perfect example of this. When I was working in the beer industry, I had partnered with a brewery. They're great people. Still talk to them this day. And it was their 1-year anniversary party. And I don't know what it was that they, on social media, we made a big deal out of having a cake. There's going to be a cake. Come down. It's the 1-year anniversary. We're going to have a time. That place was jumping. To the point where we were like, I don't know if we have enough cake. But the owner's why she's one of the managers and she's there. She had a woman come up to her and say, this is too crowded. I can't be part of an environment like this. It's too busy. There's just too much going on here. I'm leaving. And she came to me and she told me that. She said, I can't believe this woman said that. And I just told her, I remember we were standing like right to where like the entrance that went to the back, but then looked out into the main room where there were hundreds of people just having a blast. And I said, you need to turn around right now. And she did. And I said, look at what you've created and look at how happy all of these people are. If that one person doesn't want to share in that happiness, that's on her. What you've created is making the majority happy. Focus on them and let that one person make her decision to maybe come back and try again later. But if that's her reason for not wanting to be here because you've built something that's successful that other people want to be a part of, then forget about it. Move on. And she, thank you. That's right. That you are right. That's the perfect way to say it. So I think about that with everything that you're doing from a brand building perspective, whatever your vehicle for getting your brand on the map is. Accept the fact in the very earliest stages, some people just aren't going to like what you do, and that's okay. Repel those people and attract the ones that do, because you don't want to work with everybody. You want to work with the right people, the ones that you jive with, the ones that resonate with your message. And when you do that, you're going to be much happier. They're going to be much happier. Everybody wins. But if you get hung up on one negative review or one negative comment or one troll that comes along and tries to ruin your day, that's a reflection on them, not necessarily on you. So keep your focus where it needs to be.
Well, let me offer this to our listeners, and Jason, I'd like to get your take on it also, is I have what I call a segment, it's a segment called Social Media Smackdown. And I get on social media and I pick debates. I wouldn't call it a fight because that's a different thing, but I do have a whole sock and bopper thing that we're going to start dropping in our TherapyBites A.R.T Lab YouTube channel. But it's kind of meant to be fun, but I really do pick debates. And I put things out there that I know people will react against and they'll disagree with because there's so much misinformation out there. But here's how I look at that. I'm a great respecter of other people's right to form an opinion. And the big reason for that is I want the right to form my opinion. Therefore, the way I look at it is, if this is what you decide your experience to be, then, man, God be with you, whatever, bless you, go your way. You have my permission, not that you need it to do that. I respect that you as a human get to sculpt your own reality, even if it's disagreeing with me. Why do you have to agree with me? You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to find value in what I do, and I would encourage you not to. But my point is, I don't take it personally. A story about me, I recently had somebody, two interesting things. There's a colloquialism out there where people have kind of started using it to bully. When you say something they disagree with, they'll say, "Are you okay?" Now, I think that's not very genuine. I think that's disingenuous, because they're trying to, in a passive aggressive way, point out that you're wrong or that you're doing something wrong. But also had another individual, and literally on social media told me this: you should go kill yourself. I mean, come on. You didn't like what I said so much that you tell me to go kill myself. Now, I don't take that seriously either, although some might, which is why I reported the post. My point with that again is kind of what Jason said earlier, kind of going off of that, is you can let that stuff derail you, but my message to you is you don't have to. That you have the power, if someone disagrees with you, if it's just not their jam, if it's just not their thing, if the way you parent is not their thing, a teacher disagrees with you, a counselor, clinician, therapist disagrees with you, you can decide what to think about that. And that's what we do in the Art Lab, is we really acquaint people with the long forgotten power of deciding what you're going to think. And I would recommend that you decide to think things which point your life in a healthy direction. And somebody telling you that what you say is crap and it's silly or stupid, or you ought to be doing it a different way, like the guy told Jason, you can believe that if you want. My message is you just don't have to. I want you to realize you have a choice about what to believe about yourself and your message.
For full show notes and transcript of today's episode, go to therapybites.podbean.com.
The Therapy Bites podcast is HIPAA compliant. No identifying patient information will be disclosed by Therapy Bites podcast hosts or Therapy Bites podcast guests without permission from patients or guardians. All personal stories are de-identified in order to comply with HIPAA, the NASW Code of Ethics, and the ethical principles of psychologists and code of conduct. Fresh from the therapy couch and from the deep dark recesses, stories may involve exploding preconceived notions and topics uncomfortable to underthinkers and small farm animals. Audience discretion and duct taping your head for safety is advised. Concrete-headed Kool-Aid drinking humans assume all risks associated with any possibility of choking to death on the accurate, realistic thoughts presented in the art lab. This is natural selection, and Therapy Bites podcast management and hosts are not responsible.
Welcome to this episode of Fresh from the Therapy Couch, where we share stories of hurting, helping, and healing, real-life stories from real-life humans, hoping their message can be a message you'll use to improve your own lives and possibly maneuver around the mistakes they made. I was recently asked, when do you give your child the choice to going to religious service? I've also been asked, when do you give your child the choice of going to therapy? And my response to both start out the same. I have an associated question when people ask me this question, and I respond with, when did you give your kids the choice to stop attending school, to stop brushing their teeth, to stop following common household rules, not going to the doctor when medical care is necessary? The premise here seems to be that having a rule where we all brush our teeth, clean up after ourselves, flush the toilet, go to school or go to church means that later in life we will be against all these things because we were forced. Well, that's missing the more important issue. The real question is what I'm asking my kids to do, does that have value? What I'm asking my kids to do, does it have a purpose? Is it healthy for them? Is my expecting them to go back based on accurate, realistic thoughts? And if it is, then what do their objections matter as figures into your decisions as a parent? Sure, have a discussion. That's a great opportunity to discuss how we can find value in these things. Even about going to school, discuss the value of that. Brushing your teeth, provide some education. And going to church and going to therapy, instead of just saying, oh, well, they don't want to go to church, they get to not go. They don't want to go to therapy, they get to not go. They don't want to have that painful appendectomy, so they get to decide that too. How ridiculous. Have a discussion and educate. As parents, that's your job. But it's not your kid's job to decide rules of the household, rules of attending church, school, therapy, or medical care. Doc Heath, fresh from the therapy couch. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
You're listening to Therapy Bites Art Lab, bite-sized therapy for your brain with Dr. Heath and the TBAL Team. The best advice on the net. No copay required.
You're slipping beneath the cushions of your bobble-headed psychotherapist's couch, leaving behind empty, echoing, cushy, comforting, pseudo-psychological claptrap, moving into a deeper dimension of your own mind, where distorted thinking, hurting, hopelessness, and regret evaporate into clarity, healing, renewed hope, and newfound resilience. That's the podcast sign up ahead. Your next stop, Therapy Bites Psych Secrets.
Hey guys, Doc Heath here to shine the flashlight of freedom on your thinking with another psych secret. Here's something the divorce industry definitely does not want you to know about. The catastrophe merry-go-round. When your spouse is catastrophizing by thinking something is a literal threat to them, it's easy to further sabotage the relationship by thinking their catastrophizing is a threat to you. Then they will tend to catastrophize your catastrophizing, and around we go. You catastrophize, they're catastrophizing of your catastrophizing of their catastrophizing of your catastrophizing of their catastrophizing just moves you closer and closer and closer to relationship disintegration. Getting off the merry-go-round by listening actively and providing space for the conversation to develop can keep you both out of the clutches of the divorce industry. Instead of the merry-go-round, try the seesaw of communication and conversation, which we'll cover in an upcoming Psych Secret episode. Stop their merry-go-rounding. Happy seesawing. Doc Heath.
Once again, Doc Heath rips the cushions from the couch, dishes the dirt, lets the cat out of the bag, uncorks the bottle, letting the genie escape, and blows the lid off of another of the universe's psych secrets.
Live the art life. Become a TBAL Teammate Inner Circle supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/therapybites.
Here's Heath and the T-Ball Team.
I couldn't agree more. That's one of the biggest reasons why I feel, to some degree, social media has become a cesspool in a lot of ways. It's comments like that, because you don't know what kind of impact that's going to have on somebody. And the suicide rates, it's been reported for teenagers that hear comments like that because they're seeking all of this validation from their tribe, and when they don't get it, or they get negativity in return, it leads to some very horrible results. And it's awful. I think about what social media was, and I've had this thought, and this is my thought, and we don't have to get on a tangent about this, but I don't know if we can even call it social media anymore.
It's not very social.
No, it's not. It's divisive. People get on these platforms to show why they disagree with somebody else that posted something. Ultimately come to a compromise that allows us to coexist. This was how society was built. What is social media now? It's 5 to 10 second video clips, some of them useful, some of them not, some of them longer than 5 to 10 seconds, but ultimately we are consuming information in the most rapid form we possibly can. That's, again, my opinion. I have done no research to see if there's any science to back up what I'm saying. I just go off gut and what I see.
Well, like another podcast guest told us, it's like Abraham Lincoln said on social media, don't believe everything you hear on social media.
Yeah, right.
and it's amazing. See, that's my thing with psychological concepts. If you're on social media talking about diesel mechanics, I have a diesel truck, but I'm not a diesel mechanic. I'm not a proctologist. I'm not a hairstylist, a massage therapist. I'm probably the furthest away from a massage therapist you could be. But I am a clinician, and when I see inaccuracies, I jump right on that because I believe that is my message and my mission in life. And for me not to do that, for me not to call out this social media Kool-Aid drinking pseudo-psychological nonsense, for me not to call it out is unethical. For me to let that go unchallenged is unethical. And for you parents out there, for you to not, I don't know how you would say it, share with your kids the correct way of living, I would say that's not just bad parenting, that's unethical of you. If you know something and you keep your silence, I think that's not the best way to live. If you have a message and it's based in evidence, it's based in health, it's well thought out, then you have an obligation to tell people about that. And I'm not trying to convict anybody or be judgmental, but shame on you if you don't. Fear, now Jason's a little bit different. He's had lots of experience in this. And me, I do have fear for all kinds of reasons based on my thoughts. I just don't let it get in the way. What is fear? Well, fear is simply a thought manufactured by a thought process. Fear is there to say, hey, you might want to pay attention here. It doesn't mean that there's a danger. It means you have to decide if there's a danger here. Fear is not data or evidence people say it's false evidence. Well, it's not evidence at all. It's just an emotion. It says, hey, take a look at this. And it's kind of like your gas gauge. I mean, just because your gas gauge is at a quart of a tank, that doesn't mean that you're about to be out of gas. It just means it's a quart of tank. In other words, it has to be interpreted. When you experience fear or nervousness or anxiety, that just says, hey, you might want to take a look, be aware. And then you use the executive function part of your brain to decide on something. I don't want to evolve into a lesson on neuroscience. But emotions are wonderful. They're just not good evidence of whether to do something or not to do something. Otherwise, everyone that had anxiety when they think about flying would never get on an airplane. Anxiety is not evidence. What do you think, or what do you run into that are some of the biggest roadblocks to people leaping into their own expertise and really putting their expertise out there, Jason? What gets in the way most of the time?
I think a lot of it is it's overcoming that initial fear of not having confidence in themselves. I've never done this before, so how do I excel? It's knocking down those types of barriers to realize that when it comes down to it, if you approach the podcasting medium and this method of growing your brand and impacting others and networking and building relationships as a conversation versus an interview, it puts you in a completely different frame of mind. Because think about it. When you hear interview, it usually translates to getting grilled on something, right? We go to a job interview. We go in front of a video camera and we're going to get interviewed. We're getting asked a bunch of challenging questions that can plant a seed in your head. And I'm not saying that podcasts do this, but if you come into it with that mentality, it will instantly put you with a guard that may not bring out your most authentic self and your most authentic story. So it's better to come into this with the mindset that you are just meeting a friend for a cup of coffee or for a drink, and you just have a conversation about a subject that you're passionate about and you have knowledge on, because that's what it's all about. We are looking to position you as the go-to resource in your space. You have a story to tell. Your brand is wrapped up in that story. How do we bring it out? How do we bring this story to the world so it resonates with the right people? Again, will it resonate with everyone? Absolutely not. And we'd be foolish to think that our story is going to resonate with everybody. But if we be authentic, if we be ourselves, if we tell this story in a way that's compelling, that's entertaining, that makes a connection, you're going to go places because you're going to hit people that do want to hear that message, and then they're going to take the next step, which would be to follow you for more information. Come to your website, listen to your podcast, whatever your call to action may be. But you have to treat it in this networking type of way or type of approach versus putting pressure on yourself to have to perform. And that's what a lot of people do. When they get in front of a camera or get in front of a microphone, they think it's a performance piece. And there can be some showmanship to it, absolutely. But if you're relaxed and you're just having a conversation, you're just sipping your coffee and learning about what that person's passions are and what's their perspective on this and what's their slant on this story. And then you can interject your thoughts. Your mind's at ease and you can accomplish a lot more. And when you treat it this way versus as a transaction, when you connect with other podcasters, you start to build a good relationship. That relationship can lead to a number of different things. But if you just show up in sales mode and try to put on this fancy little pitch, two things could happen there. Well, three things. One could be that it worked. That's incredibly rare. Two could be that you get labeled as a person that isn't bringing value, which is going to make it harder for you to get opportunities to go on podcasts down the road. Or three, your podcast may never even see the light of day because you guys as the host may look at that content and say, our audience will not dig this. This is not what they're showing up for. They don't want to listen to an hour-long infomercial. We're not going to air this. So now you've wasted everybody's time. Get you a bad reputation. So it's treating this entire platform and this entire approach from the mindset of value, from networking, from building relationships, and maximizing your time And you can do that just by positioning yourself as a valuable asset.
And I think that is wonderful, wonderful information for podcasters, and I hope some podcasters are listening. Those who are thinking about podcasting, that is wonderful information. I want to put some shoe leather on that for our listeners who may be teachers, parents, clinicians, spouses, because I think this is so applicable, and I'm going to put my fellow clinicians here on the spot. These are my 2 associate clinicians, and I'm in a supervisory relationship with them, and they've been at it for a little bit, but I still do supervision. And clinicians often get caught up in how do you do an assessment. Now, here's traditionally how assessments are done in psychotherapy. We will have a sheet of paper. To those watching or listening, I'm holding this up to the camera. We'll have a sheet of paper. It's often called a semi-structured assessment, and it is, 100 different questions. And clinicians are taught you need to drill, baby, through every one of those questions. And what gets left out of it is what Jason mentioned, which is the conversation. And if you leave conversation out of it, you're leaving the relationship out of it. Therefore, and here's where I'm putting them on the spot. What have I told you guys or encouraged you guys to do during an assessment?
Relax and have a conversation.
See, there's that fear. I was mind reading and catastrophizing. I was saying, they're going to miss it. They're going to freeze. They're not going to know what I'm looking for. But that's exactly what I'm looking for. Is that clinicians listening, when you go to do an assessment, unless your clinic says we'll fire you unless you put your patient before the firing squad of these 100 questions, at which point I would probably find another place to work, by the way, then just have a conversation. All the assessment stuff will come out. For parents, instead of selling something to your kid, and by the way, most parents, when they go to have a conversation with a kid, it's a sales job. What are they selling? I want you to behave this way, or pick up your room. I'm trying to sell. What do a lot of husbands do? And this is a clean podcast. I won't get off deep into this, but they're trying to sell, get in their way or having sex. It's sell. What do teachers try to do? They try to sell. That is my dad used a term called bass-ackwards. That is such a bass-ackwards way of doing that. Have a conversation. Have a conversation, because when you have a conversation, a window of opportunity will open. The soil of that person's mind will become more fertile, so that what you do have to sell will be planted much more easily. Stop trying to sell and just have a conversation. Now, the piece of paper that I'm holding up to those listeners is a kind of an outline for today's show with Jason. I did this last night. I typed it out, and I've looked at it very rarely, because what Jason and I and Heather and Debbie are having is a conversation. It's organic. It's free-flowing. We make goofs and gaffes, and we forget what we're saying, and we get off topic. But see, that's the nature of conversation. And I'll say this, and we have some more questions for Jason, is that understand that the human language, and this may be a bit of a balloon bursting realization for a lot of you, the messiness of human conversation is there by design. Human communication is messy on purpose. And you know why? Because through its messiness, we can dig deeper into relationships. If human communication was as cut and dried as mathematics, our relationships would be much more shallow. Therefore, have a conversation. If you don't worry about the messiness, worry about the messiness. But for heaven's sakes, stop being so scripted and pre-programmed and just have a freaking conversation. The time is flying by here, and we've got another I don't know, 15 minutes of the episode left. Things have really just flown by. We could talk about this all day. But have you guys tracked the time we've been spending here? Or has it kind of flown by for you too?
Fast.
It went
It's
fast.
gone fast.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you just let the organic nature of human communication take over. Jason, you talk about chained to a microphone, producing words to live by. I love that when I first read it. Tell us about some of your thoughts of your own experience being chained to a microphone and some of the words you produce to help people live by.
Well, haven't I exemplified that for the last 45
You
minutes?
have. You have. We're digging for more, man. We're digging deeper.
No, but I mean, like I said, for me, the podcasting medium was the one that I gravitated to and the one that I fell in love with and the one that I wanted to excel at. So I spent a lot of time, and still do, working on my voice, working on my overall craft and my overall skill set. So I do a podcast of my own called Evolution of Brand, and I do 2 episodes a week. And it's one of the best experiences that I've had in the podcasting space because I've got to connect and have great conversations just like this with so many entrepreneurs and professionals in my space, some outside of my space. And as we sit and speak, I am working on niching it down to be a little bit more tighter to just my space and the people I'm working with. But the people that I've gotten to speak to have taught me so much. And I've been able to use that wisdom in my own practices, just in everyday conversation. And I will say, and this is a great example. Me and my dad, we drove to Atlanta. We're in Pennsylvania. We have relatives in Atlanta, and our uncle, it's my dad's uncle, my great uncle, he passed away, drove down for the funeral, and him and I, it was a lot of windshield time. We decided to drive, not fly, because airports were a friggin' mess at that point. So we just, found ourselves talking about anything and everything. And of course, I was talking about things that I'm doing in the podcast space and with my business. And he had said that you do have that natural ability to just have a conversation with people and get the most out of them. And something that he added to that is, I've observed you in conversations. It's not something that he's like doing purposely. He's just seen it. You've got some well-rounded perspectives to where you can talk to people about anything. So again, not on purpose. I just keep my ear open and I can listen to somebody tell me a good story, tell me about their experience. I get that from being chained to the microphone on my podcast, but I get it from other outlets as well. But then I can utilize all of that in my own communication with people in business setting, in just a personal setting, just having a free-flowing conversation. That's what it's all about. It's not just a business skill. This is life. Good communication is the foundation of life. If you cannot communicate, express to others what your desires are, you're going to have a lot of problems. You're going to have trouble communicating with your spouse or your loved ones or your children, with your colleagues at work. Maybe they're loved ones too, depending on how much you value your tribe at work. But point is, being chained to this microphone has taught me so much, and it allows me to take what I've learned and create my own content in the podcast space, and then through videos that I create and anything else that I'm putting into the world as well. So there's a lot to learn from being chained, but there's also a lot to learn once you break from the shackles and just get out and have some experiences and start talking to people. That's what it's all about.
That's great advice.
Do you think the sitting down and having a conversation is one way to kind of short circuit that self-sabotaging words that we have for ourselves, or just self-sabotage in general?
I think that helps. Again, having that active communication and that just having good conversations, it brings down a lot of barriers, and it can disrupt a lot of preconceived notions that you may have about yourself, because we go into a lot of scenarios in the world saying no one wants to hear me. There are so many other voices in the world talking about this and that and the other thing. Why does my perspective on this matter? So we immediately let imposter syndrome run us into the ground, and then that can, and it has for many people, prevented them from taking a leap. But what they fail to realize, and I mean, I'm not saying, I shouldn't even say they, me, all of us, we've experienced this to some degree at some point in our lives and in our endeavors, I'm sure. We don't put ourselves out there. We don't make our message heard because we feel like it's just not important enough. But what we're failing to realize in that scenario is that our unique spin could be exactly what somebody else needs to hear. So if we take time to value what we have to say, understand that we're putting that value into the world. And I'm not saying, don't put a bunch of BS out there, because then we go back to what you were saying, Dr. Heath. You just start putting misinformation that takes people down the wrong path, and it could be completely false. But because we live in a headline society, people might see that and grab hold of it, then start telling everybody else, and that's a horrible chain reaction. But if you can understand what you're all about, what your values are, what your philosophies are, and the value that you have to share with the world, and then tell that story in your own unique perspective, that's going to put you in front of the right people. And that takes time, that takes patience, that takes effort. But your unique story is needed by the world. It's needed by the right people in the world. And you will attract those people by having those right conversations, by utilizing the value that you have to give. And when things start to take off, it can be hard to stop the snowball from rolling downhill, because you'll start attracting more and more people because of that.
And I want to point out that for those of you listening, if you were not meant to have a voice, your voice would not exist. The fact that your voice exists means that you're meant to have a voice. Now and this is leading to one of the final questions I'll ask Jason, because I know he has a busy schedule and we have a couple more things to do before we let him go. There's a lot of noise out there in the world, and everybody has advice, as they say, as everyone has belly buttons. And I find the problem is people don't really think deeply enough about their message, and they really don't hone it. For parents listening, you just want to kind of have a knee-jerk reaction without putting enough thought into the information you're sharing with your kids. Teachers do the same thing. You don't really think enough about the message of your life to hone it to a very fine edge. Clinicians are the same way. Just because you've had some life experience doesn't mean that works for everybody, and it doesn't mean certainly that should be recommended to everybody. So what I'm encouraging people to do is really, really hone your message to the finest edge possible. And Karl Popper, a famous scientist, believed that we should first try to falsify our own hypotheses. In other words, we should be the first ones to try and carve and challenge what we're saying, so that it is the most helpful and the most accurate and the most realistic for others. And I find a lot of people don't do that. My question, Jason, is this. Is with all the noise out there, and with podcasting being such a low bar, for those listening, I'm holding my hands up as if it's a low bar. How do people know what to listen to and what not to listen to? What advice might you give listeners? How do you know who to listen to and know who not to listen to?
Well, it's incredibly subjective, and there are a lot of people out there that are putting their message into the world. And like I said, that unique spin that you have on your story will hit the right people just as equally as it repels the wrong people. So you're going to tune into a podcast, and there are more than likely going to be a number of criteria that you are going to look at to determine whether this show makes sense for you to listen to. Personally, I look at a few things because again, for me, it's a little deeper because I'm going into that outreach process. I want to make sure that the show makes sense. And typically I'll go to the next step to say, listen, hey, I want to have a call. Maybe we can talk about what you're looking for for a guest. And then when I have people that fit that mold, I can send them your way versus wasting your time with a pitch, which I feel is a lot of the issues that we see. People are pitching shows that make no sense for themselves or no sense for their clients just to get them on a podcast. And when that happens, the content suffers. And that's when a listener, when they're looking for the right show, may not want to stay tuned in because it's not as advertised. The average podcast listener consumes about 6.5 hours of content roughly a week. And that's in a number of different environments. That can be in the car, on a walk, at the gym. Podcasting is very passive. So in that window of time, you're going to have X amount of podcasts that you can listen to. In order to work your way into the rotation of that person, you better be delivering exactly what you say you're delivering. So if you've got an hour-long podcast and you bill it as A, and you give this description in your show notes, and that's what people say, okay, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to start listening. And then they start listening and it's not like that at all, they're more than likely going to bail and go listen to another podcast. And it's almost impossible to get that person back because you didn't meet their expectations. So it has to be pretty congruent across the board in how you're presenting that show, how you're attracting that person. And that can be done through good titles, good cover art, show notes that aren't a book long. They're just a few sentences that really drive home what a person's going to learn. And then when they tune in, is the audio quality up to snuff? Does everybody sound at the same level? Or do you have one person that sounds like this and then another person who's screaming and it can blow your eardrum out?
Yeah.
That can throw a person off as well. So these are criteria that a number of listeners will look for, and that will make the determination. I mean, the content sometimes, if that audio quality isn't there, the content could be the best in the world. But if that person isn't a trusted resource, like let's use Gary Vaynerchuk as an example, his audio quality isn't always the best, but it's Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yeah.
And he's very well respected and well known. So you'll strain a little bit to hear because he's usually got a good message to share. So you have to think on the high level of the listener experience. What are they going to get from this at the end of the day? Are they going to feel transformed when they hit play? Are they going to get what we're telling them they're going to get? That's like with my podcast. In the first 10 to 15 seconds, I lay out what we're talking about today. That's in the intro. I do a quick little ad, and then I get them to the value of why they showed up within the first minute and a half. And I start with a question to get the ball rolling because I want them to get tuned in. And in those first few minutes, that's key to locking a person in for that whole episode. And then I'll reaffirm, here's what we're going to talk about with the guest after they answer that first question, and then we dive in. It's a process that you have to be very aware of. And as coming at it from the listener side, people can be choosy now because there's a number of options out there. Podcasts are often discovered through organic search, Google, YouTube, through the podcast apps. And if they find something that looks good and it delivers, you got them. Maybe they'll come back for next week. Maybe they'll start going through the catalog. But if it repels them, then they're going to go to another show. And it's hard to get them back.
Okay, man, and as promised to our listeners, we're going to open ourselves up here for the next couple minutes and let Jason dive in to tell us the things that we've done today that really sticks out to him as winners, and then some things that we can really hone, and we don't mind criticism. We're all about embiggening listeners' lives, and we do that by self-assessment and changing what doesn't work into something that works best for our listeners. Hit us up with us. What have you seen? What do you like? What can we improve?
Well, let me start this way because this is how I would start with anybody that I'm doing this exercise with. What do you think you did well? And what do you think you did wrong?
I think that we do really well with the visuals. We work very hard at our graphics. We've worked very hard at our sound. We try to share the mic as much as possible. We try to have a conversation, have it more organic and free-flowing. I think that we need to do a better job at our show notes because I think they are too long and they could be more on point. And my co-hosts here, sometimes they're really mic shy and they need to speak up, but they're learning.
That's why I ask, because I want to see if your thoughts and my thoughts align. And in this case, they absolutely do. I will say, I love the visual on the screen. I want to ask, can I have that little guy that you made of me?
Hey, yes, sir. We're going to send you the graphic that you can share out to your friends, family, followers. We're also going to put that on a commemorative Jason Cercone mug and a Jason Cercone show shirt and give you a gift certificate so that you could go to the TherapyBites shop and get one for free. And those friends, families, and followers of you that want this as a memory to remind them to develop their brand, develop their message, they can go on the TherapyBites store and get their own commemorative Jason Cercone mug with today's show title on it also.
Exactly what I look for when I want to consume a podcast, because I don't just want to listen to a bunch of questions. And if someone says something that is, hey, here's a good point, instead of somebody just saying, I love that, that's great, and then moving on to the next question and not building upon that, that's not the most interesting audio to me. Now, some people can consume that and be completely at peace, but for me, that's one of the elements I love. The one thing I was going to say, I would have loved to hear more from Heather and Debbie today. And you already pinpointed that. So now that we know they're a little mic shy, something to build on for the next episode and beyond. Those are my critiques. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Hey, thank you so much. That's fabulous. And we have one more thing to do. But just to kind of wrap up, we've heard some wonderful things from Jason today on no holds barred self-assessment, just looking at how you're doing, what you're doing in your message as not only a podcaster, but a parent, a spouse, a teacher, employee, entrepreneur. We talked about discovering your own amazing and what you're best at, leadership in your area, your niche, some common hurdles that we've all had, including our today's expert, Jason, and how to be a thought leader in your own orbit, in your own universe. Now, you can contact Jason at his website, Jason Cercone, that is JASONCERCONE.com/work with me, and that will definitely be in the show notes. And as a audience freebie, Jason says here that you can do a 30-minute discovery session with him if you want to work with him. Anything in particular you'd like to say about that, Jason?
Yeah, I would say I actually have a couple freebies if you want to go a little bit deeper. I've extended the time on the discovery sessions to 45 minutes to let us dive a little deeper. But even before we get to that point, if you go to jasoncercone.com/guesting masterclass, you can get access to about a 30-ish minute masterclass I put together called 5 Things People Fail to Do Before Becoming a Podcast Guest. It's a great jumping off point for learning how you can utilize this medium to establish your thought leadership, to establish your authority, and ultimately, as we're all trying to do with our brands, go from unknown to undeniable. So I welcome anybody listening to go check that out today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We have one more segment to go. Heather's going to put me on the overhead camera, and I'm going to pull deep from the dark recesses of the therapy couch one of the questions that I brainstormed and curated for Jason last night. Now, Jason didn't know we were going to do this. It always works better that way. Okay, and these are really weird questions, but you can take a moment to think about it. And here's the question. What farm animal do you believe needs better branding and why?
Well, I guess it can't be the cow, because
it could be the cow.
They always wear those brands proudly. I would say, let's say the pig. Because,
and why does the pig need better branding?
Well, because, listen, the pig gets a lot of crap for rolling in mud, not having the prettiest face. But have you ever had a pig when they ultimately serve the purpose that we want them to serve? Bacon is awesome.
Oh, that's right.
So I think we should be appreciating everything about that pig while it's alive, because in our minds we know you're the man, buddy. You're
the man. And guess what, guys? Of all the farm animals, I think if you'll look into it, and I'm not a veterinarian, but I've heard pigs are some of the smartest animals in the pasture. Pigs are pretty darn bright.
I could vouch. I read Charlotte's Web to my daughter many, many times.
Oh, of course.
I'm forgetting his name now.
Wilbur,
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Wilbur. I was just thinking Templeton. I'm like he's the rat.
Wilbur, one smart pig. Jason, thank you so much. This has been such fun. Look forward to having you again sometime. Thank you, T-Ballers, for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the next episode of Therapy Bites A.R.T. Lab. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
Thank you.
Welcome to On the Couch and Off Our Rocker with Dr. Ima Freudnot, where we review our special guest Therapy Bites A.R.T. Lab episode, Psychomalarkey Scale Assessment Results. That's PMS for short.
Mr. Jason Cercone's PMS performance places him in the 94th percentile on the PMS's SBS, Stratospheric Brandylicious Scale. This indicates an amazing altitudinous amplitude of other-directed approbation in Mr. Cercone's cortical crevices, and a tenacious tendency towards synergistically strategizing for success. Overall, Super Branding Coach Cercone's PMS psychosillymetric assessments results present a picture of an individual surreptitiously sculpting similitudes, but who tames these abundant oracular impulses by peremptory prolific productions. This superabundant soul has a prodigious prognosis of podcasterosis in the foreseeable future, until the profuse prognosticative features of his psyche have been psychomologically analyzed and exercised. It is my considered conclusion that Mr. Jason Cercone be prescribed no less than a QAM 214 milligram intramuscular dose of Podcastovir and a PRN 2300 milligram intratonsillar dose of Consultitol to curtail consultitis-based cognitions. Dr. Ima Freudnot, Chief Shrinkstigator, TherapyBites Art Lab.
Grab some of this episode's guest merchandise, specially designed to help keep this episode's message top of mind in your life. Don't forget friends and family members who could use an Art Lab mental boost too. Just go to therapybites.myshopify.com.
Hey, T-Ballers. Thanks so much for being with us today. If we brought value to your day, show us some love by leaving your positive feedback and inviting some friends to listen in and join the T-Ball Team. Next time on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Welcome, T-Ballers. Now's a great time to smash that podcast subscribe button. Why you haven't already? Gosh, I can't even imagine. Also, catch up on our cool, crunchy, biweekly CouchCrumbs newsletter. Just visit the TBAL Team Page using the link I'll drop for you in the show notes. Are you still trying to figure out the mechanics of life? I know sometimes I still do. Are you sidetracked and defeated by drama, trauma, and self-sabotage? Would you or someone you love benefit from a modern-day sage's perspective on success and how he can show you a pathway beyond all of that self-sabotaging? Well, we're streaming our own world-class sage of life success, Rodolfo DeAngeli, into the Art Lab on the TherapyBites podcast to share how using some ancient practices he discovered turned his mess into his message, and how it can empower you to mop up your mess of a life as well.
Beware, there be challenging thinking ahead, T-Ballers.
But it just might change your life by painting a rainbow of cognitive recovery across the canvas of your mind. Rip the straps off your own self-sabotaging straitjacket of life as you join the T-Ball team for real-life master brush strokes you can use to repaint the off-color horizontal thoughts defeating you into a vertical trajectory to life success. It's all fresh from the therapy couch, courtesy of life transformation artist Rodolfo DeAngeli, on an episode we call Life Masterpiece, Psychology of Surviving and Thriving.
Government legal gobbledygook. Therapy Bites is not intended as a diagnostic or as an alternative to professional clinical treatment. Resources and advice are for information and entertainment purposes only. Brought to you by someone saying things you don't like? Tape that nagging loudmouth shut. Government-approved speech tape. Gas tape. Now available at your local hardware store. Therapy Bites Art Lab is not an approved, endorsed, authorized, butt-kissing affiliate of the United States Special Offense Assessment Police. SOAP for short. Warning. Consumption of Therapy Bites Art Lab content by Kool-Aid drinking, stinking thinking, social media, pseudo-psychological pushing, wacky woke anti-free speech mumbo-jumbo advocates may cause spontaneous internal skull combustion, stomach discomfort, and or laxative effects. Allergy warning. Therapy Bites is manufactured in a facility that challenges nutty distortions, processes nuggets of accurate, realistic thinking, and life-affirming beliefs. This is the audio version of the legal fine print. why are you still listening to this when you can catch the next great episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab with a good friend or family member? Really? Are you still there? This is getting silly. Move on to the next psychologically thrilling episode of the best advice on the net. No copay required.
Me eat copay.
Yeah, with Dr. Heath and the TBAL team. Go ahead, don't be podgoraphobic. Scoot, scoot, scoot. On to the next episode.